Hello, everybody. Good to be here. There's quite a few familiar faces in the audience. I think I've seen or met a few of you over the last few months at various events, and so I should apologise really for some of you. It may be some information that I've talked about only in the very last few days, but I think what we're finding out is that there's always new people at different stages in their understanding of what's happening. So bear with me. I think most of it bears repeating, bears reinforcing, and as the conversation has developed, you know, what we are saying has evolved, because coming to events like this really helps us to understand what's bothering you most, what's concerning you most, and we can tailor what we're communicating to you accordingly. So today I'll go through a bit of the timeline of not just registration, but looking forward towards inspection, planning for inspection next year. I will talk a little bit about the registration process, which I'm sure you're poring over when you look at the regulations and that have come out recently about what's going to be expected of you. But I'll go through some of the headlines on that. But we will have a chance this afternoon for you to come and search me out and ask questions. I should point out I've got a colleague in the audience who's trying to hide, but he can't hide. He can run, but he can't hide. There's Matt over there, who's helpfully called Matt from Ofsted. So don't just come to me. You can always speak to Matt this afternoon, and we can answer questions as best we can. Okay, I've got to find the right arrow. That's it, yep. Okay, so the timeline. So we've moved along this timeline already. It's moving quickly towards the left. So we're getting towards late April. Only 2 days to go before we start accepting applications to register this Friday. So we're geared up to that, but we expect it to be quiet for a few days and then hopefully build up over the next few weeks. But we don't really take a pause for breath. We'll start moving on towards planning for inspection at the same time as processing the registrations and talking to you about them. We'll be consulting heavily about the inspection framework ready for next April. So we've already started designing that consultation. We're working with care experienced young people to help us do that in a way that's particularly reaches young people themselves, because we want to make sure that we ask the right questions in the right way. As Callum says, focus on the things that matter most to children. So we'll be consulting over the summer on the inspection, but then we're processing the registrations. And then, as Callum said, you've got until October to get a complete application in. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I just want to say thank you to all of you who have expressed an interest in being part of the pilot inspections in the autumn. We've had loads of interest in that. So please don't be offended if we say thank you, but no thank you, because we don't need that many, but we are really grateful. But we'll let people know one way or the other if you've formally expressed an interest. But we'll just get a representative group to work with. And then next April, we'll start inspecting. So it sounds easy, but lots of work to do in between times. Right, on to the registration process. So this will be, the headlines here are familiar to you. Registering providers, not individual settings. And then we go into the stage one from April the 28th. You have that opportunity to put the information in you need for stage one of the registration process. So when we talk about a complete application, we are talking about the policies, the procedures, the statement of purpose that you need to give to us. It's all set out in the guidance, our registration guidance, but also elsewhere. So essentially, right at the beginning, at stage one, we just need that information from you. Then we can say, we've got the right information, it's complete. We'll give you the reference number, the unique reference number for the registration. And when you've handed over some money to us, you'll know that it's a complete application. Doesn't mean we've approved it, but it's a complete submission. So that should happen fairly quickly, and I'll say a bit more about that in a second as well. The big difference, as we've said a few places, to how we register this type of provision is that there'll be children living there in most of the places we visit. Most of the places we register, like children's homes or independent fostering agencies, don't have children there already. So we have a bit of a challenge in that we obviously want to speak to children, or we will speak to children when we do a site visit to assess your registration application. But what we're not going to do is do an inspection through the back door. We will speak to children if they want to speak to us. We'll take the opportunity if it's appropriate, but we won't be doing formal interviews of children about the application, about what they think of where they live. But we're certainly not going to ignore them. We'll just do it proportionally, and we'll wait for when we inspect to take more time to speak to children about what it's like living there, because that's what inspection is about. Registration is about whether you're equipped to do it, and and looking forward. Registration is looking at the time when we arrive and what you've done in the preceding weeks and months. So we'll try and make the difference between the two, but we can't ignore the fact that children will be living there, and often they will want to speak to us, and we certainly will. But don't organise anything formal. Don't sort of set them up to expect us to have formal interviews or showcase interviews. But we will visit a representative sample. For some of you, if it's small, it will be all of it. But for some of you who've got lots and lots of properties, it'd be a much smaller number, smaller proportion rather. So how long will registration take? I hope we can be as clear as possible about this, but the simple answer to that headline question on the slide is we don't know. It's a bit uncertain still, because we don't know how many applications we're going to get and when we're going to get them. So if you all put them in August, for example, that put different demands on us, and it will affect the timescales. But what we have said publicly is that we'll try to assess the forms that you submit at the stage one, that all the policies and procedures, etc. We'll try to do that within 5 working days. And once we've got all that information, then we move to stage 2, and we start looking for references, the checks, the local authority checks back. That's often the stage where things get a bit more tricky, and we would urge you to chase up the people, if necessary, to send the references in, and we'll be in touch with you. We'll have registered, we'll have allocated an inspector to your application. You'll have had the reference number by that stage, so you'll have someone to talk to, and we'll do our best to help you through the process. But once we get through stage 2, then and we have all the references back, as the slide says, we'll aim to visit you within 40 working days. But this is only an expectation. Please don't hold us to that. We'll get in touch with you if it's going to be longer than that, so you're not left hanging. But we have a centralised team we've set up to deal with this. We've got a number of existing inspectors on that central hub, a number of new inspectors too. So there's a mixture of experience. All are suitably qualified, all are suitably trained, and have a background in securing good outcomes for children in this sector. But we hope that having a centralised hub will mean that we can prioritise this work and do it as swiftly as we possibly can. Callum's dealt with this to some extent, and a lot of you will know this. Simple issue is that you need to get that application in within 6 months. You can legally operate beyond that date if it's complete, even if we haven't processed, but we'll keep talking to you about the progress of that application. And then local authorities in the audience will be obviously mindful that once that date's passed and children are living in supported accommodation, it needs to be with providers who've either put a complete application in or it's been approved. Okay, the registered service manager, we've had a lot of questions about this. This is an example of where we try to keep this as proportionate as possible. This is the only registered individual that we're asking for, which we hope is a response to the need to be proportionate and reduce the burden on providers. The key message we're trying to get across is that we're not going to tell you who that registered service manager should be. That's someone you should determine who's best suited for you in your organisation to meet the standards, take on that accountability. It's not going to be about it has to be 3rd tier or 2nd tier. If the management arrangements that you have in place are suitable for running the service well, to work with that registered service manager, then that's fine with us. It may be someone very senior. It may be someone quite low in the organisational hierarchy. But if it works for you and they can take on that accountability and meet the standard and take responsibility for meeting the standards, we won't have a problem with that at all. We're just certainly not going to be prescriptive about where they fit in the organisation. Okay, who should be the provider? Another commonly asked question. And again, this is distilled down to a fairly simple answer. Someone has got to take on the responsibility. One organisation has got to take that responsibility, but we're not going to be, again, prescriptive about who that might be. This sector, as you know, you don't need me to tell you, is too diverse to have a sort of one-size-fits-all approach to this. We can't be formulaic about it. We've tried to give steers about this, and we continue to try and give, have a conversation with you about it and talk it through with you when necessary, but it will be for you to determine that. Because there's all sorts of different scenarios. So if someone is able to act as the provider, sorry, I've lost my train. I was thinking about registered service manager. Excuse me. Whatever suits you best, really. We really hope that you will be speaking to local authorities, or the local authorities speaking to providers, having that conversation about how it fits best. It's usually someone who takes the lead role in the support package. And normally that's quite clear. And I think we're getting fewer questions about who should be the provider as time goes on, because I think people are realising that, which will better suit each scenario. Lots of time for questions later, if that's all right. Thanks very much. Okay, so the key points. We'll begin accepting applications 28th of April. You know about what the timescale you need to have a complete application in. 1 registered service manager, only 1 registered service manager. 2 if it's job share, but only 1 per registration. You can have more than 1 category on your application. Don't feel you have to be limited to 1 of the 4. If you feel you're equipped to run more than 1, and that's what you do at the moment, well, please do that, and we'll assess that accordingly. And it just is a condition on your registration certificate of what categories that you can provide. And above all, don't leave it too late. It can take a little longer than you might expect. So get your ducks in a row. Don't forget that first stage is quite straightforward. It should be quite straightforward. A lot of the documents we're asking you to produce, you probably have already, or you certainly can produce fairly quickly. So don't leave it too late. Any questions? NCB, you'll be able to get questions asked directed at NCB, but who also bring it to our attention. But there's also that email address on the slides that you can ask. Please do that rather than directly to me or Matt, because we sometimes, at places like this, we don't get the emails or we don't get them quickly. If you send it to a central email address, we're more likely to answer, or in a prompt way. Okay, just a couple of sort of overarching issues. We've talked about care and support quite a lot, and again, I feel that this is an issue that's landing quite well, I think, with providers. I think they're understanding that this is our approach, that care and support is part of a continuum. DfE have articulated that in their guidance too. We see it as part of a continuum. They're not two distinguished, separate issues. And we, as we've said, in lots and lots of places, we want supported accommodation, as I'm sure you do, to be kind. We want it to be nurturing, and we want it to be caring. But as time has gone on, we know that you need a bit of certainty what the red lines are. And I think if I can summarise the red lines for you, which I think is in the guidance, but I'll just surface them a little bit. Children who are deprived of their liberty and have a legal order that deprives them of their liberty, we wouldn't expect supported accommodation to be appropriate for children who are deprived of their liberty. We wouldn't expect supported accommodation to be appropriate for children who have very limited unsupervised time, or in some cases no unsupervised time at all, either at home or in the community. We wouldn't expect supported accommodation to be suitable for children who need personal care and where there's no plan for increased autonomy and no plan other than for continuing care or accommodation beyond their 18th birthday. And of course, another red line is children under the age of 16, which almost doesn't need saying, but I've said it anyway. Mobile provision. This is something that we've talked about a lot with colleagues in the Department for Education over the last few months and preceding months when we've talked about residential care. We're, like the Chief Inspector on the slide is saying, the quote there, we are concerned about the use of mobile provision for children in care and for care leavers. But I think where we've landed to try and address this as a for the Department for Education certainly, and the way that we want to treat an Ofsted is that rather than have an outright ban on mobile accommodation, which is very tricky to do legally anyway, and it may well be suitable in very, very rare and very, very exceptional. We haven't got time to say more varies, but you get the point. It really should be exceptional. This isn't about sometimes it may be exceptional. We would expect it to be really, really exceptional and be given a really good explanation about why mobile provision would be suitable. What we think the standards address is things like stigma, about disadvantage, about feeling undervalued, and the need for children to not experience those kind of things. And the standards do that. And if mobile provision, or any permanent provision for that example, doesn't offer protection from stigma, being undervalued, sense of belonging, etc., then obviously then there'll be challenges about meeting the standards. So that's how we'll deal with it. We would expect to know whether you're proposing to have mobile provision in your application, and then later on, if you're adding addresses that might be mobile, we would expect you to tell us, but we'll be trying to look out for where there is mobile provision as part of ongoing provision. Just very quickly, young people presenting as homeless, it's not within scope, but we know this could be an unintended consequence. The children who do go through the homeless route and don't come into care, but are supported through Section 17, maybe practice may change, and we have heard concerns that already is having an impact because of the demands of regulation. So we've strengthened that in our local authority inspections. We'll make sure that we have a sharp focus on that practice about children having the right, being well informed about their entitlements and having the right appropriate response to their individual need if they present as homeless. So we may see a lot more, we may get more intelligence of that through these inspections, but we certainly want to make sure we get understanding of how practice is evolving through local authorities, through local authority inspections, and we've strengthened our focus there. Just to finish, we are working really hard, as I know Callum and his colleagues have been doing as well, to have that approach of getting the balance right about what we call right touch regulation. So we keep expectations high, but we minimise unnecessary bureaucracy. We try to minimise the burden on providers. We want you to be flexible. We want you to be as agile as you possibly can be, because we know you'll need to be for this particular group of children. And I mean, those principles apply for everything we regulate, but particularly for supported accommodation because it is so diverse. So we're really mindful of that. And we'll review how we work, we'll consult heavily on it, and we hope that you come back to us if you think we're asking you for things that are totally unnecessary and don't help you to support children in the best way possible and doesn't drive improvement. This is the end of a few months, or even longer than that, of a lot of thinking, a lot of work, a lot of concerns that we've had to work through to get where we are today. It feels like we really are at the business end of things, even though we're not stopping. This is where the work really starts. But over the time, I think what we've found is that even though there are lots of concerns, there's lots of questions, some people think we should be doing more regulation, other parts of the world thinking we should be doing a lot less. You know, we're trying to get the balance right. But this is a real opportunity to get this right together, you know, and you'll have lots of challenge back to us. We'll talk to you over the next few months. We wish you well. We will try and we've talked a lot in our teams about the need to be patient and kind with this sector. There's a lot of you who haven't worked with Ofsted before and maybe quaking in your boots at the prospect. We're not, well, sometimes, you know, we're like any organisation, you can't say we're always going to be as good as we want to be, but we will try hard to be kind and considerate and patient with you over the coming months, while notwithstanding expectations of quality for children, because that will come first, as I'm sure it does for you. So thanks very much. Lots of chance to ask questions later. We've got a Q&A panel now. I think we're going to wait for specific questions later, are we? Yeah. Okay, thanks.